Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. 2026 is nearly here, but the drama is not going away after Mercedes got exposed for this compression trick with their engine and power unit going into the upcoming season that apparently Ferrari, Honda and Audi are protesting right now with the FIA. James Vowles says this is just a narrative that has been made up by a rival that realises their power unit is not going to be good enough for the upcoming season. Therefore, they've started a story to get the FIA looking closer at Mercedes to try to take them down. What is really going on right now behind the scenes? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. The politics in F1, it never went away, but it's certainly back now. Lots to get into. We're going to start here. We often talk at the start of videos about the state of the calendar, potential changes. If you want to own a part of the Suzuka circuit, I think they might be up for sale. These little cylinders, as it were, of asphalt. So they're resurfacing Suzuka, basically, for the F1 in the upcoming season, and they'll be selling the asphalt from the racing course that has hosted F1, Suzuka 8 Hours, etc, etc. So yeah, resurfacing job. We often talk about this when they're resurfacing tracks because it is relevant. The teams have to think about it for the weekends. It's not often that those pieces of asphalt are up for sale, so something to keep in mind. Let's also talk about this, which was announced today, the voting in terms of the rankings for the drivers of the season. Every year they get the drivers to do this, they get the team principals to do this. This is what the team principal have to say. Worth noting, most years all of them do it. This year we only had 8. So Stella from McLaren, Toto Wolff, James Vowles, we'll get into more of him in a second, Alan Permain. Aston Martin's senior leadership team was kind of interesting. So not Adrian Newey, not Mike Crack, not Andy Cowell, not Lawrence Stroll, but just their senior leadership team. Presumably they still only got 1 vote. Io Komatsu, Jonathan Wheatley, of course, is now at Sauber, and then Steve Nielsen at Alpine. So there was no Fred Vasseur, no representative from Ferrari, no Laura McKees, representative from Red Bull Racing. So that's worthy of keeping in mind when we look at what the rankings look like. But these are the team bosses' rankings. It's Max Verstappen. This will be no surprise to anyone. The debate, I think, becomes significant further down the order, because I think this is quite controversial actually. There are some changes I think I would make. Lando seconds, Piastri third, Russell fourth. I think all of that's okay. I think, in my opinion, I would be pretty tempted to put Russell seconds, but this, it's not an absolute disaster. I do think that Leclerc is getting absolutely cooked here for no good reason, right? Look, Hamilton's not made the top 10. They only seemingly vote for the top 10. Hamilton, of course, since 2021, his ranking has been going down. This year, he doesn't make it. Hulkenberg makes it in 10th. Hadjar in 9th, and so with Behrman as well. I think, Behrman and Hadjar, again, very interesting, because I think most people would say Hadjar was Rookie of the Year. And I also think I would back that, right? Look, I'm a big fan of Ollie Behrman. He grew up just down the road from where I grew up, so there's always a little bit of bias there, I will admit it. But Isaac Hadjar got his podium this year. His consistency was very impressive. I do think Behrman had a sensational year and is probably a better year than most people would give him credit for. But he also did have some stinker moments, right, under some red flags. Silverstone was bad. Look, he had a great rookie year in the sense that he did a lot of rookie mistakes and he had some sensational results. Mexico was, that was a P4. On another day, he could have had a podium there, right? And even after that in Brazil, he was absolutely sensational. So Behrman had a really good end to the year. Stronger, I think, than Hadjar's end to the season. So there's probably a little bit of recency bias that goes into this. Russell, I think, over the 24 races was probably a stronger driver given the machinery he had than Lando or Oscar. Now, I think that's debatable, but at the end of the season, he wasn't there quite as much, and the Mercedes wasn't there quite as much. So, I do think there's always going to be a bit of recency bias in these discussions. The way that some of the journalists try to do it is they literally just rate every driver after every weekend, then they average them over the season and see what it comes out with. But also, you could argue that performances towards the end of the season, when it, matters more, maybe, in terms of the championship positioning, but also when the cars are more settled, the drivers have learned everything that's going on with their car, their machine for the year. and the teams are generally performing at a higher level because they understand those things better, maybe those races deserve to be treated with a higher weighting, as it were. So anyway, Behrman, according to the bosses, was Rookie of the Year because they've got him 8th and Hadjar in 9th. Again, there was some talk about Antonelli, but I think when you look at the season as a whole, he can't be as high as Hadjar or Behrman. So I do think they've got the correct 2 in terms of the best 2 rookies of the year. And whether they were both top 10 drivers, I actually do agree. I think I would have put them in similar positions. But it's interesting, I think, having Behrman 8th, in my opinion, especially because there was no Fred Vasseur, right? Because you'd think Behrman's a Ferrari guy, they might give him a vote. But I guess also for Hadjar, it's the same story with Laura Bakis, right? Laura Bakis, I'm sure, would have voted Hadjar probably higher. So there's a debate on that. Hulkenberg was considered pretty good last year. This year, he also had a good season. But yeah, Leclerc's 7th to me is kind of outrageously low. I think Leclerc had a very good season given the machinery that they had, those poor Ferrari boys. And yeah, Hamilton's obviously not here in the top 10 this time. Maybe he'll be back next year. Ideally for Hamilton, he'd want to be right up the list, and that Ferrari is really good. Leclerc, shocking, I think, to see him down in 7th. Look, Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, Russell, I think you can very much argue that is the top 4. I think I'd be, there's a debate on whether Leclerc could be in there. Did Leclerc have 7 podiums in that dog of a Ferrari? And the disqualifications and all the drama they had. I think Leclerc was very excellent this season, really. But he's down in 7th. Look, Alonso was great. Don't get me wrong. Alonso had a great season. Again, he demolished Lance Stroll in qualifying 24-0 or whatever it was. That is impressive for anyone to do that to any Formula 1 driver. But it is Lance Stroll, right? I think Stroll's a bit better than some people do, but his qualifying is not a strength for him. The Aston wasn't that great. Alonso to be 5th feels a bit optimistic to me. I think I would have Leclerc there at the very lowest. Sainz is probably reasonably positioned, actually. The double podium certainly helped his case. So anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on the team bosses. Just to look at the actual rankings of this over time. So these are all the numbers from years 2008 to 2024. I'm not going to go through them in great detail, but if you guys would like to pause and have a look, then feel free to do exactly that. Those are the updated versions. I think we should have the drivers' rankings probably tomorrow. We'll see about that. Couple of other bits of drama. This is Ben Sulayem back at it again. So next year, if you want to protest a decision made by the stewards, you have to pay 20,000 euros to protest said decision. And these protests are very difficult to get through because one of the primary rules of the protest is there significant new evidence that has been added? That is one of the primary rules. And that is a problem because let's say the stewards make an absolute howler of a decision and it's clear that they've messed up big time. If that team protests that decision, it is not automatically reviewed. It is only reviewed if that team can provide evidence that was apparently not available at the time. The stewards can just say, sorry lads, you're not brought anything new to the party, so this protest is just thrown straight out, even if it was a terrible decision. That's just the rules. And now the rule is that the fee is going up drastically. Now, if it's successful, you get that number refunded. But this is a really big deal. Now, I don't think this has been confirmed yet, but Motorsport Italia says that it's happening. The unsuccessful protests will be held against the cost cap of the team. And that is a really big deal because 20,000 euros is significant when it comes to pushing up to the breaches of the cost cap. So, yeah, it's really interesting. The teams will have to be absolutely convinced that they have right to protest in order to do this. And maybe that's not a terrible thing, but I just think the rules in general need to be changed. I see the logic of, all right, we want to discourage frivolous appeals and ensure that race results are finalised more quickly. But is this the right incentive for the teams? Especially given that we know that the stewards, the way things stand, probably don't get paid enough and aren't consistent enough in terms of the actual stewards that turn up weekend to weekends to do a consistently good job. So that's another drama on that side. This on Ferrari. So this is the 2025 car at the top. This is the 2026 car at the bottom. Just an early render of what the regulations could look like for the upcoming season. The cars are shorter, they're thinner, but not substantially so, as you can tell. However, this is what I wanted to dive into, because the 2026 cars are likely to be turning up in Barcelona with a rather different specification to what they're going to turn up in Bahrain for the tests, for the actual broadcasted tests, and especially to Melbourne for the first Grand Prix. So, Ferrari have actually said that they're doing this. The other teams haven't said anything, but presumably could follow suit. A launch version, and then effectively a B-spec updated version of the car. What's interesting about this report is that it actually discusses where those updates will mostly be featured. So there are rumours, of course, like this is just a mock-up car. We don't really know what next year's Ferrari is going to look like, what the livery is going to be. But the theory is that on the B-spec version, you are going to see updates where these arrows are. Updates to the front nose, updates to the leading edge of the floor, the barge boards and the side bit of the floor as well, and a reprofiling of the side pod. That's what's been discussed. This was actually an article on Racing News 365. I'll leave everything linked down below as always, where they discuss that in the final spec, they're going to potentially reposition the radiators compared to the launch version. Effectively, the launch version is just, okay, this is a very basic car. Does the engine work? Does the active aero work? Etc., right? We get a couple of days of testing, but there's also 6 days worth of testing in Bahrain. That should be plenty with an updated version, because if you're going to bring the same version, there's going to be lots of upgrades that happen in the roughly month between the first and the last test. So you might as well wait. Suspension design also appears set for revision, with current indications suggesting Ferrari will turn to pushrod layouts at both front and rear. We discussed that over the last month or so. The decision stems not from any fundamental failure with the SF25's front pull rods, but rather from the theoretical advantage offered by revised internal component positioning. The pushrod arrangement theoretically permits more pronounced narrowing of the lower chassis sections, resulting in a slimmer nose profile and tighter rear packaging, whilst ensuring adequate airflow to the rear diffuser. So that's the discussion anyway on what they're going to change between their launch spec and the real deal, but only time will tell. Now, another big update before we discuss the engine drama. Aston Martin / McLaren, they're back at it again. So this is Andreas Seidel, former McLaren man, also former Audi man. He came in to kind of manage the transition. Then he got sacked. They brought in Bonotto. Now, Aston Martin currently do not have a CEO. They have a team principal in Adrian Newey. They used to have a CEO team principal in Andy Cowell. There's also rumours in this report. Mike Crack, I mean, understandably, because he effectively got demoted, didn't he, from his team principal role to whatever else he's doing now. He's probably not very happy with things. Adrian Newey has his opinions. That is very clear. And if he disagrees with Mike Crack, if he disagrees with Andy Cowell on certain things, then Newey's way or the highway. And that may be the case here for Crack. Now, they need a CEO. Adrian Newey does not want to do media, doesn't want to talk to sponsors. You know, he wants to design the car. So there's an opening there. We discussed when Newey was first confirmed as TP. Is there an opening for Christian Horner or maybe somebody else? Is there an opening for Gianpiero Lambiase? That's a conversation over the last few days. But apparently Andreas Seidel is also in conversation. So just to keep an eye on that one. The other big update is on GP. So we've talked about this a couple of times over the last few days. That GP, initially there was talks that he was linked to Aston Martin. Yesterday's reporting suggested he actually is going to leave. At least the Italian press thinks it's more likely that he does than he doesn't. We'll see about that if he does end up staying with Red Bull or not. But as I said yesterday, the more teams interested in GP, the lower the chances he stays, because the better offer that he's going to get and the more challenging it's going to be for Red Bull to actually match that, especially if he wants to spend some time away from the track for the reasons that we have discussed in recent days. So an article today comes out suggesting that McLaren are also interested. So in addition to Aston Martin giving him what I'm sure is going to be a pretty spectacular offer, in addition to Williams and James Vowles also negotiating, trying to get Lambiase to come to their exciting operation, McLaren are also saying, you know what, another Red Bull guy, just like Rob Marshall, just like Will Courtenay, could we just sign GP as well? You know, it'd be a big scalp. Whoever gets Lambiase, it's going to be not only a massive loss for Red Bull and for Max, but also a huge gain, I'm sure, for those teams. The fact that he could be available, the fact that he might be stepping away from Max's engineer role and wanting to spend more time back in the UK, that probably means other teams could give offers that are more compelling to him. Now, will Lambiase want to return to a race engineer role at some point? Could he do that for Max at Aston Martin in the future? Possibly. Could he do that for Lando Norris? I think that would be a pretty cursed timeline. I doubt that very much. But the fact that McLaren are involved, I mean, yeah, it's just another arrow in the direction that GP is probably going to leave Red Bull, because it's difficult to imagine that they're going to have a great offer that can match the best of these three teams trying to secure his services. Again, big question for me is, what does the gardening leave look like, right? What's the time frame on which they could potentially secure him? That is a good question. But let's talk about the engine drama. There are discussions from Ford on their engine. They say it's gone to plan, or it's certainly going to plan, but it might not be so clear-cut, because Ford actually say they are expecting a small disadvantage compared to rivals. Look, nobody really knows, but they have admitted that, they're expecting a recoverable, they have time to develop their engine, but some level of disadvantage in thermal engine power compared to their rivals that have more experience. That's understandable. Frankly, that's expected. It doesn't, mean great news for Max Verstappen, especially if Ford are effectively admitting it. But look, they've set their targets. They've hit their targets. Their targets just aren't, they think anyway, where their rivals' targets will have been, especially with the rumours as to what Mercedes are up to. Now look, have Red Bull found a way to also generate more power from higher compression that is allowed in the rules, but you could maybe use thermal deformation to make it so when the car is not being tested, you're actually generating a higher performance than you are at rest. That's what Mercedes may or may not have been up to. If you guys have been following this story over the last couple of weeks now, Mercedes reportedly found this way to not trick the rules precisely, because apparently they've been in conversation with the FIA over this and effectively said, okay, are you testing these compression ratios at ambient temperature? They said yes, and then they said, okay, well, if they're slightly different at different temperatures, is that okay? And the FIA said, well, it's a grey area, it's a loophole, but there's nothing that we are going to do about it. Now, there are recent rumours that Ferrari, Honda, Audi, they're submitting a protest, and the intention of that protest will be not to make the engines illegal now, but to make them illegal in race 6 or race 7, so that Mercedes have to have a choice between, okay, do they keep pushing now and have a performance advantage in the first few rounds, or do they decide to abandon that ship now and work more on the engines they will eventually have to use? Who knows what the future really holds, because James Vowles says this ain't even true. He thinks, now look, he used to work for Mercedes, right? He was Toto Wolff's right-hand man. Now he works at Williams. He's clearly done a great job over the last couple of years, but also he is a Mercedes customer. So no doubt he will give some defense to his boys at High Performance Powertrains, but it's still interesting to hear the politics of all this, right? Because Val says, nobody knows, no one of the engine manufacturer knows where they are going to fall. Part of the speculation that appeared was one team and PU manufacturer trying to create a narrative to get some changes. To be completely clear, no one really knows. I doubt Ferrari has done a poor job. They're very good at getting it right year on year. Honda has produced a benchmark engine. I don't think it's going to be like 2014 when you have a runaway. Mercedes, we have been working, I like how it says we as well, but specifically on 2026 with them. So I guess he is talking about Williams here. But since early 2024 when we signed the agreement, what I can say is they have done good prep. Let's see what that translates to. So this sentence very interesting, right? He doesn't address compression ratios and all that drama specifically, but he does say that these speculations in recent days have appeared because a team is creating a narrative. Now, look, he obviously says speculation. He doesn't necessarily deny that this is what Mercedes might be doing. What he says is that the speculation has appeared because one team is trying to get some changes, right? Which is probably part of just the process. But what is interesting to me is that he mentioned specifically one team and PU manufacturer. So, I guess that's one and the same. And then he goes on to name drop Ferrari and then name drop Honda, which is also Aston Martin related. So I guess reading this, it could probably be either. The implication is anyway that if they are doing something, it's certainly not to the extent that it could have been. And the reason why this is arriving now is because that team wants to put serious pressure on the FIA, just full stop, right? And I think that's the point. The implication from Vowles, really, he doesn't deny it outright, but he does imply, I think, that The reason why this is a talking point is because the teams are concerned that Mercedes are going to be stronger than them, and therefore they've got to find something to make it so that all of the attention of the governing body is on Mercedes' engine, right, and less on their engine. Whether that's compression ratios or whatever, if another team can start playing the politics game and get the FIA's scrutiny all over Mercedes, then I think they will find themselves in a better position in the medium term. Again, what does it mean for the start of next season? Maybe not that much, but we know how these politicking games go, and Vowles says that that is exactly what is going on in recent days, and possibly this compression ratio stuff, it may just be a theory based on changes in the wording of the regulations. Maybe it's possible that Mercedes aren't actually doing this, or their solution for doing so is not as advanced as some people are currently suggesting. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.